Welcome to another episode of Growth Hacker TV. I'm Bronson Taylor, and today I have Dave Zohrob with us. Dave, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, Dave, you are a hacker in almost every sense of the word. You hack code as a developer, and you also hack growth with some of your products. You've had some products that you've been involved with that have reached some substantial scale. Let's start with one of the biggest ones, at least as far as I can tell online, one of the biggest ones, which was LOL Quiz. LOL Quiz dominated Twitter for a period of time. So tell us, what was LOL Quiz?
It was a really simple, straightforward, personality quiz site. It's something honestly that I hacked up in a few days. It was right after Twitter opened up its platform to third-party developers for applications, not just clients.
Yeah. So how did it actually work?
It was pretty straightforward. Personality quizzes, 10 or 20 questions, what kind of Harry Potter character are you, right? And you answer the questions, and you say, oh, you're Harry Potter, or whatever it is, right? And to get it going, I basically paid a bunch of people off Craigslist, $5 per quiz to, write, I had maybe 50 quizzes when I started, and then, kind of put it out there. And I was also working on some other Twitter quiz stuff, or Twitter apps at the time, like 140 Mafia and a bunch of other things that maybe didn't do quite as well as this one, and it just kind of took off on its own, honestly.
Yeah.
It was pretty straightforward, viral loop, right? Mm-hmm. You take the quiz, it says oh, you're Hermione or whatever it is, and at the end you tweet it out, and then all your friends see it, and they go and take the quiz, and life is good, right? Yeah. I started with 50 or 100 quizzes that I had paid people for, and then at the end we had a total of 50,000 quizzes that people had written and stuff in multiple languages. All kinds of crazy things kind of happened mostly on its own. It just kind of took off.
Yeah, so you had 50,000 quizzes. I can only imagine how many tweets and how many people involved that means. I mean, that's just millions of people now, right?
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, the reach was pretty wide. At one point, there was a grad student that was doing some research on Bitly and Bitly's data set, because Bitly was pretty new at the time, and ended up emailing me because some significant percentage of all Bitly links were links to low quiz results, right?
Yeah.
Which I thought was pretty funny.
That's awesome. You arrived when you dominated URL shortener.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we were doing 5 million page views a day for a while, and it didn't really last forever. We were dominating Twitter trending topics, and I don't think that they really liked that, right? So eventually the trending topics were one of the big ways that we got a bunch of traffic, because basically I'd had this Twitter account with hundreds of thousands of followers, and anytime I tweet out a link to a quiz, everyone would take it, it would become a trending topic, and at some points we had a few quizzes in the trending topics, and everyone would just click it and take the quiz, and it was just this kind of crazy short-lived phenomenon of just super viral growth, right?
Yeah, so you would have more than one spot in the trends.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, that didn't last very long because they basically just shut me out, right? I mean, ultimately, it's maybe it wasn't Twitter as a platform, but people liked it, and I was having a good time. So
no, absolutely. Well, let me ask you, what did you learn about growth through that experience? Because so few people get to kind of be that close to a rocket ship, no matter how simple and fun or how short-lived it is.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting to see it go from I had the Google Analytics on there, and I built a lot of my kind of custom analytics tools as well, and it's just funny to see it go from this kind of 250 page views a day, 500, and then it was 5,000. I was well, 5,000 is pretty good, right? Mm-hmm. And then at some point it just went, and Twitter is this really interesting platform. And I don't really know if something like this would be possible now on Twitter because they're much more restricted about what they let you do. But one of the biggest days we had was when this Disney celebrity, this teen singer, took one of the quizzes that somebody had written about her. Right, and my servers just went down. There were tens of thousands of people trying to take everything at the same time, and it was just it was crazy, right? It was just a lesson in the power of numbers and just the power of traffic, right? It's Twitter is all about this real time thing. You have a celebrity tweet out a link, you're going to have in the minutes afterwards so tens of thousands of people from all over the world trying to click that link, right? Mm-hmm. And I just had a few servers I was renting somewhere. I was not prepared for that.
Yeah, well, it's hard to be prepared for that.
Yeah, a lot of it is just trying to keep up, right? You're just trying to keep the thing from falling over. So I think it's easier now with all the cloud stuff that's out there, but it was definitely an experience.
Yeah, it's a fun story. And before
Yeah.
LowQuiz, you worked as an engineer at HOTorNOT. And so as I saw that, it made me wonder, did your experience at HOTorNOT, kind of seeing the growth of their product, kind of allow you or inspire you to try things like LowQuiz and 140 Mafia? Because it feels kind of the same in terms of it's lightweight, it's fun. It's not curing cancer, but it wastes a few minutes and it gets a lot of traffic. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, HOTorNOT was like absolutely, kind of a training ground for building consumer web products, right? I worked there just for a little while, like in '05, '06. But, it was a pretty small team, very analytics driven, very data driven. At any one time, there were only probably a few engineers and a few customer service people. But they made a lot of money, and everybody had a pretty good time working on it, right?
Yeah.
And we had a fair amount of independence. And basically, the idea was if you could build it, and you track the data and say, well, yes, this is good for the bottom line, or yes, people like this, then we had pretty much free reign to do stuff, right? And the HOTorNOT mindset was, like I said, very data driven. Before that was cool, right? It was like all kind of homegrown analytics tools, tracking basically every action on every part of the site. And on top of that, the things that we really cared about were speed. Like the page loads had to be super, super fast because there was a measurable impact on revenue if it was slow, which I think a lot of people, Google has done studies on this, everybody's done studies on this, right? And also just simplicity, right? Dead simple product design, right?
Yeah.
HOTorNOT did not win any design awards, I'm sure, and neither has Craigslist, right?
Uh-huh.
But they do what they do, and that's all they do, and people get it, and that's what matters, right? So like most of the things that I've done that have been successful, even if it hasn't been quite as as low to the ground as HOTorNOT was, right?
Mm-hmm.
It ends up being about that kind of simplicity, right?
Yeah.
But it should do one thing, do it exceptionally well, do it fast, right? And that's the best recipe that I've had for success, right?
Yeah, no, that's great advice. And you mentioned a few times that HOTorNOT, they made a lot of money. That's one of the questions I have about these kinds of things is how easy is it to monetize something like HOTorNOT or LowQuiz, because it feels like it's not durable, from the outside looking in, but then there's companies built off of it. So how easy is it to monetize it, and would you recommend people try to go that route if they're really trying to build a business?
Yeah, so HOTorNOT actually had a very large and sustainable recurring revenue business as a dating site, which nobody really knew about.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't know about it when I took the job, right? I thought it would just be a funny line on the resume, right? So I'd do some freelancing for HOTorNOT, but ultimately, I spent a long time there because there was, a lot to learn from the people, right? So they had a dating site with a lot of users, hundreds of thousands of active users at any one time. And some chunk of those people were paying $6 a month to contact other users, right?
Okay.
And basically, the HOTorNOT model lives on. It's kind of sad that HOTorNOT still isn't around because apps like Tinder or Meet Me or all these kind of mobile dating apps are basically doing the exact same thing with the exact same mechanics as HOTorNOT. And doing very well, So in some sense, I think all of us that worked on HOTorNOT at one point or another are thinking man, we should have been able to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was a great model. They did really well. It was amazing, right? So they managed to somehow transition from this flash in the pan cultural phenomenon to a really strong business, right? That's hard to do.
Yeah, no.
The LowQuiz thing was a flash in the pan just for a little while.
Yeah, so it seems like maybe the takeaway is that, if you have this kind of viral growth, use it as a customer acquisition to something else that you can then monetize whatever that something else is. Serve that audience that's already inspired by what you're doing, and kind of way to roll it in there.
Yeah, for sure. Because there was a pretty loose coupling between the two sides of HOTorNOT. We called it the rating side and the meeting side, or the dating side, right? And the dating side was great. It was a much smaller group of users, right? But those users, were interested in something that was like a real business, right? LowQuiz never made that leap, right? It was just, quizzes, right? and you can try throwing ads on those page views and stuff, but it's basically like the lowest quality traffic you can think of. So everyone just wants to they want to take your quiz, you want to get the answer, right?
Yeah.
But I think the rise of the App Store or the app stores, right, Google Play and whatnot, have made it a lot easier to monetize that kind of stuff. There's hundreds of millions of people with their credit card information saved, right, in Apple servers, and you can charge 99 cents for something here or there, and maybe not make a venture scale like billion-dollar business, but at least you can pay for your server expenses and get the traffic going towards something that will actually be sustainable, right?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the app stores a little bit, because later you worked with Megatasty and you made iOS apps that ended up having millions of users for those iOS apps. So what kinds of apps did you guys create at Megatasty?
So at Megatasty, I was working with Jim Young, one of the founders of HOTorNOT, and we had tried a bunch of different stuff before I ended up working on the App Store. And we had built a lot of social networking applications, right, in a broad sense. The biggest one was this app called Free Photo Messenger, FFM, which was a very simple anonymous instant messenger application, right? So it kind of fulfilled a lot of the role that Snapchat probably fills now for people. But in 2009, 2010, 2011, it really just kind of took off amongst especially teenagers and iPod Touch users, because there weren't a lot of options for messaging, right? There was no iMessage on iPod Touch, right?
Yeah.
And we'd also built some other social networking apps. The most popular ones were something called Who's Around, which is like a location-based chat app to show you people around you.
Yeah.
And a series of apps that were kind of themed, like Who's Around, like location-based social networking, but also with a theme. Like we had a Jersey Shore theme thing. I had like a music theme social network that would look at the songs on your iPod. And create a music profile for you, and you can chat with other music lovers, that kind of thing. So at some point we had I think 6 of the top 50 social networking apps on the iPhone.
Wow.
In the App Store. And the competition is a lot stiffer now, so two guys can't necessarily do that anymore, although if you can, more power to you. We were just kind of trying a bunch of different ideas, and the ones that worked really worked, and the ones that didn't work, nobody remembers, so it's okay.
Yeah. How did you get them to spread like they did? Was it just kind of natural, people sharing with their friends, in person, or was there something deeper you guys were doing as a strategy there?
A lot of it, is about going back to the HOTorNOT thing, super simple product design, right? Mm-hmm. The free photo messenger filled a need that people had, and we just made it really dead simple. It didn't do anything, right? All it did was let you send messages to these usernames, and then later, and then there were photos, right? And that was it. And that, it turns out, is a good recipe. Again, a good recipe, right?
Yeah.
So people, if you went into chat rooms of other games or anything like that, people were sending around their FFM usernames because it was anonymous and people could use it on their iPods, and it just kind of like fit this niche that didn't exist, right?
Yeah.
And the rest of it, we definitely designed a lot of mechanics for people to share on the apps, right?
Yeah.
To invite friends, you have all kinds of incentives for people to do it. But ultimately, we had a pretty strong organic growth from our core products, and we use that to cross-promote all the rest of the products. And on the App Store, if you're ranked highly in any category, you get a fair amount of traffic. People just, going browsing through social networking and saying, "Oh, that looks interesting," and they'll install it, right? So the more you can kind of get that real estate on those charts, you can do pretty well.
Yeah. Now, so you've kind of grown, products in two very different ways. You've had the low quiz, viral, Twitter, kind of thing. You've also had the App Store. Very few people have done both. I've had people on that have done well with apps. I've had people on that have done well with kind of these viral spreading things. But to do both is unique. As you compare the two, which are you more drawn to now? Would you try to do a low quiz again? Would you try to do iOS apps again? Or do you think you're kind of done with both and there's a better, the grass is greener somewhere else now? What's your view on the landscape?
I think mobile is the way. With my last startup, I did not do mobile, and I think that was a mistake. Just looking at the trends, looking at the number of iPads that have been selling in the last quarter is something like 18 million, some crazy number, right? Of like people who have these devices, people install apps on these devices, people are willing to spend time with your app and give it a shot in a way that I think on desktop is just not there anymore, right? the way I always try to think about it when I'm designing something is that somebody gets a link to your app or your product, right? And they have 7 other IM windows open on their computer. There's a YouTube video of like a cat falling down the stairs, and everything. There's like 10,000 other things going on, right? And your app has like a few seconds to catch their attention.
Mm-hmm.
At least on the phone, there's not another. You don't have other windows open. You don't have, YouTube things all over the place, right? You just have the one. You have their full attention for however many seconds you can convince them, to stay with you, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is kind of a different experience, and I just think there's that idea that the experience is fundamentally different, and also just that the trends towards mobile adoption are just insane, So
Yeah.
I think, I don't think the web is going to go away anytime soon, but whatever my next thing is, it's definitely going to be on mobile.
Yeah, so you talked about your next thing, and then you've also talked about how with your last startup, one of the pitfalls was that it wasn't mobile. So let's talk about your last thing a little bit, because I think this is going to be really helpful for people. So recently you were involved with Flatiron Collective. So tell us briefly, what was Flatiron Collective?
All right, so Flatiron was me and 2 other guys that I worked with at HOTorNOT. We all kind of stick together. I convinced them to move out here to New York and start something new. And we started without any particular idea of what we were going to work on. We ended up deciding to focus on this product called Lookmark, which is a Chrome browser extension to kind of essentially create private groups for sharing news. And the twist is that it would share automatically from sites that you chose. Right? So you would say, I would say, like, okay, Bronson, you're my friend. Like, I'm going to share all of the stuff I read on the New York Times and on all the videos I watch on growthhacker.tv with you. And you choose to share CNN with me. And then we kind of get this kind of real-time feed of what each other.
Idea.
It was a cool idea. We had, we built a quick prototype, had our friends on it. It went pretty well. We decided to raise some money. We had some great investors. For whatever reason, I think there are a lot of reasons, but we weren't able to kind of break out of this sort of power user kind of audience, right? And everything else that I've done has been, very much mainstream, shoot for the mass market right away. I was thinking, well, we're going to do these power user thing, and then we're going to kind of slowly make our way towards the mass market, right?
Yeah.
But after a year of kind of spinning the wheels on it, just really kind of hit a wall, right? Like we weren't able to make that leap, right? And that has been, honestly, a really tough experience, right? The first time where I really felt like, man, like this really didn't work.
Yeah.
And it's a product I really like. And it's tough to see, we had to announce to our users a couple weeks ago, like, hey guys, sorry, like we're going to shut it down, and that's been, a difficult process.
Yeah. On the homepage of Lookmark, when you announced it to your users, you posted an email on the website. And you said that the reason you were shutting it down, you were very, transparent about it, was that it didn't really hit the growth goals that you had for Lookmark. If you don't mind, disclosing kind of what were your internal growth goals, and maybe you didn't have an exact number, but you just knew you weren't there.
Yeah, we weren't there, right? I mean, like the number that like people throw around is like 10% a week or something, which like compounds over time to millions of users, right? Which is great. I've never had like a specific number that I was trying to hit. We kind of threw in 10% a week is just kind of a round number, but like, you want you want your growth rate to accelerate, right? You want you want 10% growth over time, right? Not like a steady number of users per day. If it's a steady numbers of users per day, your growth rate is actually decreasing, right? Because your user base is increasing, right?
It's a churn.
Yeah, it's a churn. Yeah, exactly. There's like a lot, and we just didn't hit it, right?
Yeah.
And after trying all these different ways, we tried some kind of viral stuff. We tried like changing the product around, changing up the onboarding process, changing the messaging, and it just didn't happen, right? We had these users, these power users that love the thing and spend all day on it, which is great, right? But couldn't figure out how to bridge from them to a larger audience.
Yeah. Maybe you have an answer for this, and maybe you don't. I'm not sure. But looking at it now and kind of going through it. Do you have any ideas of why it didn't go from the power users to the mass audience that you wanted? Can you look at any particular thing and be like, that might have been the reason, that might have been the problem?
Yeah, I think there's a few things that I would take away from it. I mean, it's hard because you don't want to like create too many rules, right? So that like the next time I'm going to like do this and not do this, right? Because like, things change all the time, right?
Yeah.
But
there's a lot of luck involved in all this too.
Yeah, exactly, sure. But like, when I'm trying to pull away from it, is that number one, we like didn't follow the HOTorNOT rule, which is that the product has to do one thing, right, and just do the one thing very, very well and nothing else.
Okay.
Right? And our product was kind of cool, but very complicated. It plugged into your browser. You get this kind of social layer on top of what you're reading. So like if I went to a New York Times article that you had already read, I could see your little thumbnail, and if you had left a comment or a tweet about it, I would see that, which is very cool. But like once you kind of got into it and had friends on it, it was a very cool experience, very unique experience. But try to explain that in 5 words, you can't, right? That I think is a problem, right? Because if I want to tell you about this new product that I love and I can't explain it to you, how is that going to grow, right?
Yeah.
And I think the second thing is, people read on so many different devices now. This goes back to mobile, right? It's like we wanted to do this kind of automatic sharing, automatic recommendations based on your browser history, which is a cool idea, but it turns out like even super avid readers, like they do some reading on their laptop, they got some on their phone, they got a little on their iPad, maybe they got a Kindle, like, the specifically news and links and reading is so fragmented now that even in the best case, we would have only captured like some, percentage of your reading, and that's just not as cool as capturing everything, right? So there's some kind of fundamental kind of platform-based problems there.
Yeah, and that you've done something that's, I think, very difficult for an entrepreneur to do, which is to be honest with yourself. You look at the product, you knew internally kind of basically 10% or something like that was what you were looking for month after month, and you were honest with yourself to say, look, it's not there. And instead of going at it another year and spending 12 more months kind of, on the hamster wheel, you decide, all right, let's move on to something else. How important do you think that kind of realism is for an entrepreneur? Because an entrepreneur, they have to be super optimistic and yet somehow very real at the same time. And that mix is almost impossible.
Yeah, it's a tough balance, right? I mean, a lot of people I think would say, like, well, why don't you tough it out? Why don't you keep iterating? And I think that, some of it is data, right? You look at the data and I say, like, well, these data are not very promising. The growth is not there. Mm-hmm. And then it's also kind of a gut feel thing. Like, do you think that if you keep digging in this area that you're going to find the gold that's hidden underneath, right? Yeah. And I just felt like even if we kept digging, we wouldn't find it, right? And that's a tough thing to admit because you do want to be the optimistic guy. You hear all these stories about determined people. If they just stick to it, then they find their thing. But you don't hear all the stories of guys who, spend another 18 months, burn through all their investors' money, and didn't get anywhere. That's not as good of a story, right? And, it was kind of, it was a really tough call. And some of our investors have been, all of our investors have been super supportive. Some of them have said, well, why don't you keep going? And I think that's a totally fair question, right? Mm-hmm. I think personally, we just felt like we're not going to find the gold, right? We're going to keep digging, and then we're going to have nothing to give back to you. I think at the end of the day, everybody understands that. And I think that the transparency to the users, transparency to the investors, like, it's the best you can do. You got to be honest with yourself and honest with everyone you interact with, and hopefully that serves you well in the long run, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, some people say that you can only learn from successes. Some people say you learn from failures. I think you learn from both, depending on who you are. Sure. It's like if you're willing to learn from both, you can learn from both. And you learn what not to do, you learn what to do, and it's all it's all going to be rolled into the next thing if you're the kind of person that's willing to learn. So.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that there's plenty that I can take away from this experience, personally, professionally, like technology-wise, And the best part has been hearing from users that like the product and said, like, it's, let us know what you do next. Investors also that say, like, look, we backed you, and just let us know what your next thing is. We'll back you again. Like that kind of support is great, right? Because it's a tough thing to do to shut down a product, right? Yeah. But to feel like you can just regroup and come back from the next swing, that feels great. That's like the best you can hope for, right?
Yeah, and you earned that through your transparency and through your honesty. You earned their trust to be able to come back and take another at bat with those users or those investors or whoever it may be.
I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope so. Now, let me ask you this. You're one of the hardcore developers that we've had on the program, and we've only had a couple of those. There's a handful here and there. But how much do you think engineering really allows you to grow products? Is it just something that you couldn't do without, or is it essential, or is it just it's extra? It helps. It's nice that you can actually go into the code and write these things that are going to be the mechanisms for sharing and distribution. How do you view your ability to program at that level?
Well, I think that's a really good question, right? I think that one of the things that's changed since I started doing this kind of development is that there are a lot more third-party tools to allow you, like Mixpanel or Kissmetrics or any of these things. There are different third-party analytics tools now that'll help you figure out what your product is doing and how to make it grow, right? Which just didn't exist even 5 years ago or whatever, right? And I think that HOTorNOT built everything in-house. I used to build absolutely everything in-house. Every time I'd start a company or do a new app, you click up all these kind of new you write the analytics tools specifically to your app. And I think that being able to do that is obviously very helpful. I think you need it a little bit less now than you used to because you can drop in Mixpanel or whatever it is, right? It's free for a small amount of usage, and you're good to go, right? I mean, knowing what to test and all that stuff, that's still really important, but you don't need to have a developer code up a logging tool for you because you can just use one, right? I think what it really comes down to is, an analytical mindset of saying, what is it that we're trying to do? What are the hypotheses we need to test? What are the data that's going to give us what do we need to test these things? And let's go and do it. Are we going to A/B test something? Knowing what to A/B test is an important thing. Knowing what variations to make. It's art. It's science, right? So for me, I feel really lucky that I'm able to both come up with a product, build it, test it, iterate it, make it work, right? I feel like that's a unique thing in time. That at what point in history can one person do so much with the kind of tools that we have available to us, right? It's crazy, right? Yeah. But obviously, there's plenty of people that you've talked to with your list. You don't need to be an engineer. You just need to have that analytical mindset of knowing, what questions to ask and what do you need to answer them, right?
Yeah, that's great insight. Dave, this has been an awesome interview. I have one last question for you. It's sort of a high-level question. You can take it any direction you want. But what's the best advice that you have for anyone that's trying to grow a startup?
That's also a great question, right? I think there's a couple of things. I think the first thing is going back to that analytical mindset thing. I think that there are right answers for a lot of questions that could be asked about your product, your startup, your business, right? And it's hard to get them. It's hard to know what questions to ask, right? But that ultimately, you have a gut feel about something. I think the button should be this color and it should be in the center of the screen or on the right or whatever. But there's some art to it, but there's also science. You can try something, build it, try it, put it in front of people, see what people do. And I think that the sooner you do that, the better off you're going to be, Yeah. And I think the other thing is just to do it, just to go and put things in front of people. I mean, I guess that's a continuation of the first thing, so forgive me for making 2 out of 1. But
no, it means you really care about that point.
Yeah.
Double up on it,
And the last thing I guess I would want to hammer home is just the simplicity. That you open up so many startup homepages or app descriptions or whatever, and you're like, what the heck is this, right? And if you, as a a smart technical person, involved in the industry, can't describe what a product is in a few words, how's anybody going to do it, right? So that focus on simplicity, it's always served me well in the past, and I hope that it would serve others as well.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. Best of luck to you with your next venture. I know you're a true entrepreneur, and you're going to take a breather and then be back in the game again. And thank you so much for just taking time out of your schedule and coming on the show to educate our audience.
Thanks a lot, Bronson. It's been my pleasure.